Reading from the letter to the Hebrews. Brothers and sisters, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us rid ourselves of every burden and sin that clings to us, and persevere in running the race that lies before us, while keeping our eyes fixed on Jesus, the leader and perfecter of the faith. For the sake of the joy that lay before him, Jesus endured the cross, despising its shame, and has taken his seat at the right of the throne of God. Consider how he endured such opposition from sinners, in order that you may not grow weary and lose heart in your struggle against sin. You have not yet resisted to the point of shedding blood. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The responsorial psalm, they will praise you, Lord, who long for you.
They will praise you, Lord, who long for you.
I will fulfill my vows before those who fear him. The lowly shall eat their fill. They who seek the Lord shall praise him. May your hearts be ever merry. They will
serve you, Lord, who long for you.
All the ends of the earth shall remember and turn to the Lord. All the families of the nations shall bow down before him. To him alone shall bow down all who sleep in the earth. Before him shall bend all who go down into the dust.
They will praise you, Lord, who long for you.
And to him my soul shall live, my descendants shall serve him. Let the coming generation be told of the Lord, that they may proclaim to a people yet to be born the justice he has shown.
They will praise you, Lord, who long for you. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Mark. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered round him, and he stayed close to the sea. One of the synagogue officials, named Jairus, came forward. Seeing him, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him, saying, "My daughter is at the point of death. Please, come lay your hands on her that she may get well and live." He went off with him, and a large crowd followed him. There was a woman afflicted with hemorrhage for 12 years. She had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all she had. She was not helped, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. She said, "If I but touch his clothes, I shall be cured." Immediately, her flow of blood dried up. She felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Jesus, aware at once that power had gone out from him, turned round in the crowd and asked, "Who has touched my clothing?" But his disciples said to him, "You see how the crowd is pressing upon you, yet you ask, 'Who touched me?'" Then he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, realizing what had happened to her, approached in fear and trembling. She fell down before Jesus and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has saved you. Go in peace, be cured of your affliction." While he was still speaking, people from the synagogue official's house arrived and said, "Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher any longer?" Disregarding the message that was reported, Jesus said to the synagogue official, "Do not be afraid, just have faith." He did not allow anyone to accompany him inside except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they arrived at the house of the synagogue official, he caught sight of a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. So he went in and said to them, "Why this commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but asleep." And they ridiculed him, so he put them all out. Then he took the child's father and mother, and those who were with him, and entered the room where the child was. He took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." The girl, a child of 12, rose immediately and walked around. At that, they were utterly astounded. He gave strict orders that no one should know this, and then said that she should be given something to eat. The Gospel of the Lord. One curious little detail about the putting together of this particular gospel excerpt, and then I want to make a more spiritual comment, I suppose. And that is that it seems, for all practical purposes, that the woman with the hemorrhage kind of is an insert that interrupts the flow of the whole story of the curing of Jairus' daughter, except for one little thing. And that is, if you pay attention, she had been afflicted with this ailment for 12 years. The little girl who was healed was 12 years old. And so there's a nice kind of a dovetailing of these details here that brings us to the realization that the girl was the same age as the woman who had been afflicted for all those years. Was there a connection, perhaps? At least in Mark's mind, it seems like there must have been some kind of a connection between the suffering of the woman and the age of the child. So that's an interesting detail. But more importantly for us, what we're talking about here is healing. And what we're talking about for us is not only physical healing. Lord knows, we got a book of prayer intentions and the other names that I mention at Mass all the time. We've got a list of people who are suffering and who have got all kinds of ailments that are problematic. We even have a couple here who still have them and are dealing with them, like, Ken with his knees, okay? But there are other dimensions of suffering and sorrow that also have to be taken into account. And I think what we want to do is to ask questions, for example, about the parents of this little girl, or the woman herself with the flow of blood. Yes, there's a physical ailment, obviously, that took the life of the child. There's a physical ailment that the woman was suffering. But what about the emotional anguish of the parents while they're watching their little girl go downhill? The woman herself, frustrated that at every turn, with every doctor, it seemed like promises made were not kept. Those kinds of anguishes. We have those kinds of anguishes. All of us, and they can be emotional from afflictions of one kind or another that are thrown upon us. They may be physical, they may not be. They may be only emotional, they may be spiritual. And what we have, if you recall what Mr. John Green was talking about during the Catholic Charities Talk Sunday, the poor you will always have with you. You know what? The suffering you will always have with you also. And that's why one of the crucial passages of the gospel from Sunday on the Sermon on the Mount is, "Blessed are they who mourn, they shall be comforted." Okay? But that's our role, to comfort those who mourn. As I think it was the 8:30 Mass, I made mention of the passage, which is roughly the equivalent from the letter to the Romans, which was a favorite of St. Augustine, where he says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep." In other words, as St. Paul will say in the letter to the Galatians, bear one another's burdens. And those burdens sometimes are the emotional ones. And sometimes those sufferings are ignored, or sometimes they're worse than a physical ailment. A physical ailment may weaken us and actually focus us. More often than not, though, the emotional stresses that we have from events that happen in our lives or other circumstances happening to people that we love are so great that they blur us. They blur us. And especially they blur us if we feel like we have to bear them alone. So we celebrate today healing. We celebrate prayer for the sick. But we acknowledge the fact that there are so many ways in which healing needs to be in our hearts. And we can ask God then to not only open us to whatever touch needs being healed, but also that we can open up our own hearts sensitively to others who are in need of that kind of healing. Let us stand and pray.